What's up, Highlanders? Hope you guys are hanging in there. I hope that you're having a little bit of time outside because it's important to get some fresh air and enjoy the changing of the seasons and hopefully recognize that we're just one day forward on this journey and hopefully one day closer to returning to some kind of normalcy. Just going to get right into it today. Chapter 4 of The Fantastic of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Chapter 4 is an interesting little side story. It involves the main characters, but it doesn't really do much to move along the plot, the main plot anyway. But what it does do is it provides a lot of fantastic characterization, and it groups together three characters who wouldn't normally be together in society, and in particular this society. And I want you to do something as we read and we look at these three characters who are featured in this chapter. I want you to figure out what do all of these characters have in common. So what do these three people have in common, even though they couldn't be any more different? So chapter 4 of Mice and Men. Crooks, the Negro stable buck, had his bunk in the harness room, a little shed that leaned off the wall of the barn. On one side of the little room there was a square 4-pane window, and on the other a narrow plank door leading into the barn. Crooks's bunk was a long box filled with straw, on which his blankets were flung. On the wall by the window there were pegs on which hung broken harness in process of being mended, strips of new leather, and under the window itself a little bench for leather working tools, curved knives, and needles and balls of linen thread, and a small hand riveter. On pegs were also pieces of harness, a split collar with the horsehair stuffing sticking out, a broken hame, and a trace chain with its leather covering split. Crooks had his apple box over his bunk, and in it a range of medicine bottles, both for himself and for the horses. There were cans of saddle soap and a drippy can of tar with its paintbrush sticking over the edge, and scattered about the floor were a number... Still going? Sorry, technical difficulties. And scattered about the floor were a number of personal possessions. For being alone, Crooks could leave his things about, and a stable buck and a cripple, he was more permanent than the other men, and he had accumulated more possessions than he could carry on his back. A few things about Crooks. One, he's a permanent fixture on the ranch. All these workers like George and Lenny, they come and go through the season, right, depending on what jobs need to be accomplished. Crooks, on the other hand, is a permanent fixture on the ranch. He is always at the ranch. He lives there permanently. So he's acquired and accumulated all these things, as opposed to people like George and Lenny, these migrant workers, who only own what they can carry on their back for the time being, even though Lenny and George have a dream of owning land. Another thing about Crooks is take a look at that description that opens this chapter. You have the description of Crooks, who is physically bent. So he's actually crooked, right? His back is all messed up and out of line. What a great name for a character who's like that. Crooks, right? He is actually crooked. Also, you look at the descriptions of everything that he has in his personal space off in the barn, right? That's another thing you got to keep in mind is even though he's a permanent fixture on the ranch, he's black. So he has to sleep out in the barn with the animals. In his personal space, he has with him all these different things to help mend other people or animals, right? He's got the tools needed to mend the horses, right, to replace the horseshoes on their hoofs. He's got medicine to help them. He's got medicine to help himself. All right, everything about the opening of this chapter screams at us broken, right? Crooks is physically broken, but he is also the victim of a broken society, right? He's black in the 1930s. So segregation is at full swing. The country's still very much separated, and racist terms like the N-word are thrown around like they're nothing. But keep that in mind. Everything about the opening of this chapter screams broken. Now, think about that. Crooks is broken because he's physically broken, and he also is a reminder of how broken society is. Check out what other two characters appear in this chapter and think about how they too are broken. Crooks possessed several pairs of shoes, a pair of rubber boots, a big alarm clock, and a single-barreled shotgun. And he had books too, a tattered dictionary and a mauled copy of the California Civil Code for 1905. There were battered magazines and a few dirty books on a special shelf over his bunk. A pair of large gold-rimmed spectacles hung from a nail on the wall above his bed. This room was swept and fairly neat, for Crooks was a proud, aloof man. He kept his distance and demanded that other people keep theirs. His body was bent over to the left by his crooked spine, and his eyes lay deep in his head, and because of their depth, seemed to glitter with intensity. His lean face was lined with deep black wrinkles, and he had thin, pain-tightened lips, which were lighter than his face. It was Saturday night. Through the open door that led into the barn came the sound of moving horses, of feet stirring, of teeth champing on hay, of the rattle of halter chains. In the stable-buck's room, a small electric globe threw a meager yellow light. So remember, it's Saturday night, so this is the night that everybody goes into town to have their fun. Crooks, even if he were invited, he wouldn't be welcome at those establishments anyway, so he's just going to hang back. Crooks sat on his bunk. His shirt was out of his jeans and back. In one hand, he held a bottle of liniment. Liniment is a general term referred to medicine. It's supposed to help aching joints and muscles. And with the other, he rubbed his spine. Now and then he poured a few drops of the liniment into his pink-palmed hand and reached up under his shirt to rub again. He flexed his muscles against his back and shivered. Noiselessly, Lenny appeared in the open doorway and stood there looking in, his big shoulders nearly filling the opening. For a moment, Crooks did not see him, but on raising his eyes, he stiffened and a scowl came on his face. His hand came out from under his shirt. Lenny smiled helplessly in an attempt to make friends. Okay, second character introduced in this chapter, Lenny. How is Lenny broken? Crooks said sharply, "You got no right to come in my room. This here's my room. Nobody got any right to in here but me." Lenny gulped and his smile grew more fawning. "I ain't doing nothing," he said. "Just come to look at my puppy. And I seen your light," he explained. "Well, I got a right to have a light. You go on, get out of my room. I ain't wanted in the bunkhouse, and you ain't wanted in my room." "Why ain't you wanted?" Lenny asked. This is how innocent Lenny is, right? He asks the black guy who's segregated in the barn with the animals, like, "Why aren't you wanted in the bunkhouse? What could it possibly be?" "Because I'm black. They play cards in there, but I can't play because I'm black. They say I stink. Well, I'll tell you, all of you, stink to me." Lenny flapped his big hands helplessly. "Everybody went into town," he said. "Slim and George and everybody. George says I gotta stay here and not get in no trouble. I seen your light." "Well, what do you want?" "Nothing. I seen your light. I thought I could just come in and sit." Crooks stared at Lenny, and he reached behind him and took down the spectacles and adjusted them over his pink ears and stared again. Think about what has just been revealed. What else do Crooks and Lenny have in common? Right? They're both broken. Crooks physically, Lenny mentally. Neither of them are wanted. Right? Crooks is exiled to the barn. He's not wanted in the bunkhouse. Like I said, he wouldn't even be welcome at those establishments downtown anyway. And Lenny is told, "Stay home, right? You're not wanted out with us tonight." So both of these guys, even though they couldn't be more different, have quite a bit in common. Crooks stared at Lenny, and he reached behind him and took down the spectacles and adjusted them over his pink ears and stared again. "I don't know what you're doing in the barn anyway," he complained. "You ain't no Skinner. There's no call for a bucker to come into the barn at all. You ain't no Skinner. You ain't got nothing to do with the horses." "The pup," Lenny repeated. "I come to see my pup." "Well, go see your pup then. Don't come in a place where you're not wanted." Lenny lost his smile. He advanced a step into the room, then remembered and back to the door again. "I looked at him a little. Slim says I ain't to pet him very much," Crooks said. "Well, you've been taking him out of the nest all the time. I wonder the old lady don't move him someplace else." "Oh, she don't care. She lets me." Lenny had moved into the room again. Crooks scowled, but Lenny's disarming smile defeated him. "Come on in and sit a while," Crooks said. "As long as you won't get out and leave me alone, you might as well sit down." His tone was a little more friendly. "All the boys gone into town, huh?" "All but old Candy. He just sits in the bunkhouse sharpening his pencil, sharpening and figuring." Crooks adjusted his glasses. "Figuring? What's Candy figuring about?" Lenny almost shouted. "About the rabbits?" "You're nuts," said Crooks. "You're as crazy as a wedge. What rabbits you talking about?" "The rabbits we're going to get, and I get to tend them and cut grass and give them water and like that." "Just nuts," said Crooks. "I don't blame the guy you travel with for keeping you out of sight." Lenny said quickly. "It ain't no lie. We're going to do it. We're going to get a little place and live off the fat of the land." Crooks settled himself more comfortably on his bunk. "Sit down," he invited. "Sit down in the nail keg." Lenny hunched down on the little barrel. "You think it's a lie," Lenny said, "but it ain't no lie. Every word's the truth. And you can ask George." Crooks put his dark chin into his pink palm. "You travel around with George, don't you?" "Sure, me and him goes every place together." Crooks continued. Sometimes he talks, and you don't know what the hell he's talking about. Ain't that so? He leaned forward, boring Lenny with his deep eyes. Ain't that so? Yeah, sometimes. Just talks on, you don't know what the hell it's about? Yeah, sometimes, but not always. Crooks leaned forward over the edge of the bunk. I ain't a Southern Negro, he said. I was born right here in California. My old man had a chicken ranch, about 10 acres. The white kids come to play at our place, and sometimes I went to play with them. And some of them was pretty nice. My old man didn't like that. Never knew till long later why he didn't like that, but I know now. What do you guys think he's referring to? That's right, racism, segregation. Terrible, terrible aspect of our society. He hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. There wasn't another colored family for miles around. Now there ain't a colored man on this ranch, and there's just one family in Soledad. He laughed. If I say something, why, it's just a nigger saying it, Lenny asked. How long do you think it'll be before them pups will be old enough to pet? Here Crooks is trying to form a connection with Lenny, or just try and start a conversation about something meaningful, right? Something like racism and Lenny's place in society versus Crooks's place in society. And of course, Lenny doesn't understand a word and just asks about his pups. Crooks laughed again. A guy can talk to you and be sure you won't go blabbing. A couple of weeks and then pups will be all right. George knows what he's about. Just talks and you don't understand nothing. He leaned forward excitedly. This is just nigger talking. Busted back nigger. It don't mean nothing, see? You couldn't remember it anyways. I've seen it over and over. A guy talking to another guy, and it don't make no difference if you don't hear or understand. The thing is, they're talking, or they're sitting still not talking. It don't make no difference. No difference. His excitement had increased until he pounded his knee with his hands. George could tell you screwy things, and it don't matter. It's just talking. It's just being with another guy, that's all. He paused. So here you get some insight into George and Lenny's relationship again. Crooks is right, and he's making fun of Lenny. He's saying, like, you know, someone like George can say whatever they want to you, and you're not going to understand, right? George can tell you the best secrets he's ever had in his life, knowing that you're not going to blab about it because you don't understand a word anybody's saying to you. That's how dumb you are. But he's also making an observation that I guess it doesn't matter what you guys talk about. The fact is, you got each other to listen to, and that's all that matters, even if you don't understand a word George is saying because you're so stupid. His voice grew soft and persuasive. Suppose George don't come back no more. Suppose he took a powder and just ain't coming back. What do you do then? Lenny's attention came gradually to what had been said. What? He demanded. I said, suppose George went into town tonight and you never heard of him no more. Crooks pressed forward some kind of private victory. Just suppose that, he repeated. You won't do it, Lenny cried. George wouldn't do nothing like that. I've been with George a long time. He'll come back tonight. But the doubt was too much for him. Don't you think he will? Crooks's face lighted with pleasure in his torture. Nobody can't tell what a guy'll do, he observed calmly. Let's say he wants to come back and can't. Suppose he gets killed or hurt, so he can't come back. Lenny struggled to understand. George won't do nothing like that, he repeated. George is careful. He won't get hurt. He ain't never been hurt, because he's careful. Well, just suppose he don't come back. What do you do then? Lenny's face wrinkled with apprehension. I don't know. So what are you doing anyways? He cried. This ain't true. George ain't got hurt. Crooks bored in on him. Want me to tell you what'll happen? I'll take you to the booby hatch. I'll tie you up with a collar like a dog. He's talking about take you to the psychiatric ward, the loony bin, right? Someone like Lenny can't operate on his own out in society. Suddenly, Lenny's eyes centered and grew quiet and mad. He stood up and walked dangerously toward Crooks. Who hurt George? He demanded. Couple things. One, yet again, Lenny being described like an animal, right? Crooks says they're going to tie you up with a collar like a dog. Two, clearly Crooks is just having fun and messing around with Lenny, right? Saying, oh, what if George doesn't come back? What are you going to do? Lenny immediately becomes defensive and thinks something has happened to George, right? And so we see just how little Lenny can comprehend. Crooks saw the danger as it approached him. He edged back on his bunk to get out of the way. I was just supposing, he said, George ain't hurt. He's all right. He'll be back all right. So Lenny gets agitated and gets up and says, who hurt George? And Crooks is like, just easy, fella. Right? Talking to the Hulk, right? Sun's getting low. Lenny stood over him. What you supposing for? Ain't nobody going to suppose no George to hurt. Crooks removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with his fingers. Just sit down, he said. George ain't hurt. Lenny growled back to his seat on the nail keg. Ain't nobody going to talk no hurt to George, he grumbled. Crooks said gently. Maybe you can see now. You got George. You know he's going to come back. Suppose you didn't have nobody. Suppose you couldn't go into the bunkhouse and play running because you was black. How'd you like that? Suppose you had to sit out here and read books. Sure, you can play horseshoes till it got dark, but then you got to read books. Books ain't no good. A guy needs somebody to be near him. This is a major, major message of this book. Right? Why are George and Lenny friends? They shouldn't have anything to do with each other. Why are Lenny and Crooks talking to each other? They shouldn't be interacting. Because people need other people. He whined. A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody. It'll make no difference who the guy is as long as he's with you. I tell you, he cried. I tell you, a guy gets too lonely and he gets sick. George gonna come back, Lenny reassured himself in a frightened voice. Maybe George come back already. Maybe I better go see. Crooks said, I didn't mean to scare you. He'll come back. I was talking about myself. The guy sits alone out here at night, maybe reading books or thinking or stuff like that. Sometimes he gets thinking, and he got nothing to tell him what's so and what ain't so. Maybe if he sees something, you don't know whether it's right or not. You can't turn to some other guy and ask him if he sees it too. You can't tell. You got nothing to measure by. I've seen things out here. I wasn't drunk. I don't know if I was asleep. Some guy was with me. He could have told me I was asleep and then it would be all right. But I just don't know. Crooks is looking across the room now, looking toward the window. So Crooks is expressing his sadness and his loneliness and his reasoning for telling Lenny that, you got it good. You got somebody to be with. I don't have anybody. Lenny said miserably, George won't run away and leave me. I know George wouldn't do that. The stable buck went on dreamily. I remember when I was a little kid on my old man's chicken ranch. I had two brothers. They was always near me, always there. Used to sleep right in the same room, right in the same bed, all three. Had a strawberry patch, had an alfalfa patch. Used to turn the chickens out in the alfalfa on a Sunday morning. My brother sat on a fence rail and watch them. White chickens they was. Gradually, Lenny's interest came around to what was being said. George says we're going to have alfalfa for the rabbits. What rabbits? We're going to have rabbits in a berry patch. You're nuts. We are too. You ask George. You're nuts. Crooks was scornful. I seen hundreds of men come on by the road and on the ranches with their bindles on their back and that same damn thing in their heads. Hundreds of them. They come and they quit and go on, and every damn one of them has got a little piece of land in his head. Ain't never a goddamn one of them ever gets it. Just like heaven. Everybody wants a little piece of the land. I read plenty of books out here. Nobody never gets to heaven. And nobody gets no land. It's just in their head. They're all the time talking about it, but it's just in their head. He paused and looked toward the open door, for the horses were moving restlessly and the halter chains clinked. A horse whinnied. Guess somebody's out there, Crook said. Maybe Slim. Slim comes in sometimes 2-3 times a night. Slim's a real skinner. He looks out for his team. He pulled himself painfully upright and moved toward the door. That you, Slim? He called. Before we get to the next character who gets introduced in this chapter, let's talk about what Crooks reveals about George and Lenny's plan, right? George and Lenny have this plan. They're going to save up their money and buy a piece of land and never have to work for anybody else ever again. And Lenny tells Crooks that. And Crooks said, I've seen hundreds of people come through here with that same exact plan. And nobody gets that land, right? So not only are we seeing Crooks's learned pessimistic attitude, not only are we seeing the difficulty that George and Lenny face in trying to do this, but mostly we're seeing a generalization, a characterization of how difficult it was for people to achieve their American dream during the Great Depression. Right? The American dream was kaput because of this Great Depression. Candy's voice answered. Slim went in town. Say, you seen Lenny? You mean the big guy? Yeah, seen him around any place? He's in here, Crook said shortly. He went back to his bunk and lay down. Candy stood in the doorway, scratching his bald wrist, looking blindly into the lighted room. He made no attempt to enter. Tell you what, Lenny, I've been figuring out about them rabbits, Crook said irritably. You can come in if you want. Candy seemed embarrassed. I don't know. Of course, if you want me to. So, another character who is broken, right? Physically broken, missing a hand, spiritually broken, has no family, he's old, he's worried about being put down like his dog, right? So he too has a broken aspect to him. Come on in. If everybody's coming in, you might just as well. It was difficult for Crooks to conceal his pleasure with anger. Candy came in, but he was still embarrassed. You got a nice cozy little place in here, he said to Crooks. Must be nice to have a room all to yourself this way. Sure, said Crooks. And a manure pile under the window. Sure, it's swell. Lenny broke in. You said about them rabbits. Candy leaned against the wall beside the broken collar while he scratched his wrist stump. I've been here a long time, he said, and Crook's been here a long time. This is the first time I've ever been in his room. Crook said darkly, Guys don't come into a colored man's room very much. Nobody been here but Slim. Slim the boss. Candy quickly changed the subject. Slim's as good a Skinner as I ever seen. Lenny leaned toward the old swamper. About them rabbits, he insisted. Candy smiled. I got it figured out. We can make some money on them rabbits if we go about it right. But I get to tend them, Lenny broke in. George says I get to tend them. He promised. Crooks interrupted brutally. You guys are just kidding yourself. You'll talk about it a hell of a lot, but you won't get no land. You'll be a swamper here till they take you out in a box. Hell, I've seen too many guys. Lenny here will quit and be on the road in 2-3 weeks. Seems like every guy got land in his head. Candy rubbed his cheek angrily. You goddamn right we're going to do it. George says we are. We got the money right now. Yeah, says Crooks. And where's George now? In town. In a whorehouse. That's where your money's going. Jesus, I've seen it happen too many times. I've seen too many guys with land in their head. They never get none under their hand. Candy cried. Sure they all want it. Everybody wants a little bit of land, not much. Just something that was his. Something he could live on. There couldn't nobody throw him off it. I had never none. I planted crops for damn near everybody in this state, but they wasn't my crops, and when I harvested them, it wasn't none of my harvest. But we gonna do it now. Don't make no mistake about that. George ain't got the money in town. That money's in the bank. Me and Lenny and George, we're gonna have a room to ourselves. We're gonna have a dog and rabbits and chickens. We're gonna have green corn and maybe a cow or a goat. He stopped, overwhelmed with this picture. Crooks asked, Say you got the money? Damn right, we got most of it, just a little bit more to get. Of it all in 1 month. George got the land all picked out too. Crooks reached around and explored his spine with his hand. I've never seen a guy really do it, he said. I've seen guys nearly crazy with loneliness for land, but every time a whorehouse or a blackjack game took what it takes. He hesitated. If you guys would want a hand to work for nothing, just his keep, why, come and lend a hand. I ain't so crippled. Can't work like a son of a bitch if I want to. So here we have more technical difficulties. Here we have Crooks finally break down and understand that this dream they have, not only is it really a dream, but it just might work, right? They have some of the money. Crooks has never seen anybody who wants land actually accumulate the money to buy it, except for these guys. And so now he's saying, whoa, you guys have the money? You guys need a hand? Right? So now all of a sudden, Crooks is a believer. And just when all three of these guys are, in sync on this dream, and now Crooks wants it, right? Crooks wants it. The most pessimistic, and for good reason, he's black in a segregated country. The most pessimistic, negative person, even Crooks, is like, yeah, I want in. Notice what happens as soon as Crooks gets that level with the other two characters. Any of you boys seen Curly? They swung their heads towards the door. Looking in was Curly's wife. Her face was heavily made up. Her lips were slightly parted. She breathed strongly, as though she had been running. Curly ain't been here, Candy said sourly. As soon as they were all on board, as soon as these three guys, as soon as Crooks was finally convinced that this could actually happen, as soon as Lenny and Candy were talking about the rabbits and getting all excited, in walks Curly's wife. This is very symbolic, incredibly symbolic. From here on out in the book, notice what happens, because at this moment, you can trace everything that happens from here on out. You can trace it all back to this moment. She stood still in the doorway, smiling a little at them, rubbing the nails of one hand with the thumb and forefinger of the other, and her eyes traveled from one face to another. They left all the weak ones here, she said finally. Think I don't know where they all went? Even Curly. I know where they all went. Lenny watched her, fascinated, but Candy and Crooks were scowling down away from her eyes. Candy said, Then if you know, why you want to ask us where Curly's at? She regarded them amusedly. Funny thing, she said. If I catch any one man and he's alone, I get along fine with him. But just let two of the guys get together and you won't talk. Just nothing but mad. She dropped her fingers and put her hands on her hips. You're all scared of each other, that's what. Every one of you is scared the rest is going to get something on you. After a pause, Crooks said, Maybe you better go along to your own house now. We don't want no trouble. Well, I ain't giving you no trouble. Think I don't like to talk to somebody every once in a while? Think I like to stick in that house all the time? So even though, as you'll find out, Curly's wife is the center of a lot of the things that happen that are negative from here on out, in this moment she shows up into a room full of broken guys, and she admits to herself and them that she's kind of broken too, right? She says, I'm lonely. You think I like living here? You think I don't need someone to talk to too? So these characters, all of them in this particular chapter, all have that in common, right? There's something broken about them, and they're lonely in a way that I don't think people in our day and age can really consider knowing. Candy laid the stump of his wrist on his knee and rubbed it gently with his hand. He said accusingly, You got a husband. You got no call fooling around with the other guys, causing trouble. The girl flared up. Sure I got a husband. Y'all seen him. Swell guy, ain't he? Spends all his time saying what he's going to do to guys he don't like. And he don't like nobody. Think I'm going to stay in that 2x4 house and listen how Curly's going to lead with his left twick and then bring in the old right cross? 1-2, he says. Just yell 1-2 and he'll go down. She paused and her face lost its sullenness and grew interested. Say, what happened to Curly's hand? There was an embarrassed silence. Candy stole a look at Lenny. Then he coughed. Why? Curly, he got his hand caught in a machine, man. Bust his hand. As you'll recall, that's not what happened. Lenny crushed it. She watched for a moment, then she laughed. Baloney. What do you think you're selling me? Curly started something he didn't finish. Caught in a machine, baloney. Why, he ain't give nobody the good old 1-2 since he got his hand busted. Who bust him? Candy repeated suddenly. Caught in a machine. All right, she said contemptuously. All right, cover him up if you want to. What do I care? You bindle bums think you're so damn good? What do you think I am, a kid? I tell you, I could have went with shows. Not just one, neither. And a guy told me he could put me in pictures. She was breathless with indignation. Saturday night, everybody out doing stunting. Everybody. And what am I doing? Standing here talking to a bunch of bindle stiffs. A nigger and a dum-dum and a lousy old sheep, and liking it because they ain't nobody else. So here she reveals her dismal existence. She wanted to be a performer and actress, and she met somebody who said they put her in movies and put her in shows, and that didn't really work out. So here she is, stuck on a ranch with a husband who's less than ideal as a husband, and she's all by herself, talking to, as she says, a dum-dum, a black guy, an old guy. Great. That's all I got. Lenny watched, her mouth half open. His mouth half open. Crooks had retired into the terrible protective dignity of the Negro, but a change came over old Candy. He stood up suddenly, knocked his nail keg over backward. I had enough, he said angrily. You ain't wanted here. We told you ain't. And I tell you, you got floozy ideas about what us guys amounts to. Now, Curly's wife is not wanted. Lenny's not wanted with the boys in town. Crooks isn't wanted by all of society. Candy isn't wanted because he's an old man, right? And now we find out that Curly's wife isn't wanted by she's not even wanted by the rejects. You ain't got sense enough in that chicken head to even see that we ain't stiffs. Suppose you get us canned. Suppose you do. You think we'll hit the highway and look for another lousy two-bit job like this? You don't know that we got our own ranch to go to and our own house. We ain't got to stay here. We got a house and chickens and fruit trees and a place 100 times prettier than this. We got friends. That's what we got. Maybe there was a time when we was scared of getting canned, but we ain't no more. We got our land, and it's ours, and we can go get it. Curly's wife laughed at him. Baloney, she said. I've seen too many of you guys. If you had 2 bits in the world, why, you'd be getting in 2 shots of corn with it and sucking the bottom of the glass. I know you guys. Candy's face had grown redder and redder, but before she was done speaking, he had control of himself. He was the master of the situation. I might have knew, he said gently. Maybe you just better go along and roll your hoop. We ain't got nothing to say to you at all. We know what we got, and we don't care whether you know it or not. So maybe you better just scatter along now, because Curly maybe ain't gonna like his wife out in the barn with us bindle stiffs. She looked from one face to another, and they were all closed against her. And she looked longest at Lenny until he dropped his eyes in embarrassment. Suddenly, she said, Where'd you get them bruises on your face? Lenny looked up guiltily. Who, me? Yeah, you. Lenny looked to Candy for help, but then he looked at his lap again. Got his hand caught in a machine, he said. Curly's wife laughed. Okay, machine. I'll talk to you later. I like machines. Candy broke in. You let this guy alone. Don't you do no messing around with him. I'm going to tell George what you says. George won't have you messing with Lenny. Who's George, she asked. The little guy you come with? Lenny smiled happily. That's him, he said. That's the guy, and he's going to let me tend the rabbits. Well, if that's all you want, I might get a couple rabbits myself. So here, Curly's wife is starting to flirt with Lenny. She realizes that Lenny was the one who beat the crap out of her husband, and so that automatically makes her like Lenny, and she's attracted to him because of that. Trouble. Crook stood up from his bunk and faced her. I had enough, he said coldly. You got no rights coming in a colored man's room. You got no rights messing around in here at all. Now you just get out, and get out quick. If you don't, I'm going to ask the boss not to ever let you come in the bar no more. She turned on him in scorn. Listen, nigger, she said. You know what I can do to you if you open your trap? Crook stared hopelessly at her, and then he sat down in his bunk and drew into himself. She closed on him. You know what I could do? Crook seemed to grow smaller, and he pressed himself against the wall. Yes, ma'am. Well, you keep your place then, nigger. I could get you strung up on a tree so easy it ain't even funny. Crooks had reduced himself to nothing. There was no personality, no ego, nothing to arouse either like or dislike. He said, yes, ma'am, and his voice was toneless. For a moment she stood over him as though waiting for him to move so that she could whip at him again. But Crook sat perfectly still, his eyes averted, everything that might be hurt drawn in. She turned at last to the other two. Old Candy was watching her, fascinated. If you was to do that, we'd tell, he said quietly. We'd tell about you framing crooks. Tell him be damned, she cried. Nobody listened to you, and you know it. Nobody listened to you. Candy subsided. No, he agreed. Nobody listened to us. Lenny whined. I wish George was here. I wish George was here. Candy stepped over to him. Don't you worry none, he said. I just heard the guys coming in. George will be in the bunkhouse right now, I bet. He turned to Curly's wife. You better go home now, he said quietly. If you go right now, we won't tell Curly you was here. She appraised him coolly. I ain't sure you heard nothing. Better not take no chances, he said. If you ain't sure, you better take the safe way. She turned to Lenny. I'm glad you bust up Curly a little bit. You got it coming to him. Sometimes I'd like to bust him myself. She slipped out the door and disappeared into the dark barn. And while she went home through the barn, the halter chains rattled, with some horses snorted, and some stamped their feet. Crook seemed to come slowly out of the layers of protection he had put on. Was that the truth, what you said about guys come back? He asked. Sure, I heard him. Well, I didn't hear nothing. The gate banged, Candy said and went on. Jesus Christ, Curly's wife can move quiet. I guess she had a lot of practice, though. Crooks avoided the whole subject now. Maybe you guys better go, he said. I ain't sure I want you in here no more. Colored man gotta have some rights, even if you don't like 'em. Candy said. That bitch didn't ought to have said that to you. It wasn't nothing, Crook said dully. You guys coming in and made me forget. What she says is true. But here we see the unfortunate reality of society is even if Crooks were to have a dream, and even if Crooks were to have a little bit of the pessimism of him chipped away by the dream of Lenny and Candy and George, one interaction with some terrible white person puts him into this mindset that he's known his whole life, which is the mindset that segregation creates. The horses snorted out in the barn and the chains rang and a voice called, Lenny! Oh, Lenny, you in the barn? It's George, Lenny cried, and he answered, Here, George, I'm right here. In a second, George stood framed in the door, and he looked disapprovingly about. What are you doing in Crooks's room? You hadn't ought to be in here. Crooks nodded. I told them, but they come in anyways. Well, why didn't you kick him out? I didn't care much, said Crooks. Lenny's a nice fella. Now Candy aroused himself. Oh, George, I've been figuring and figuring. I got it doped out how we can even make some money on them rabbits. George scowled. I thought I told you not to tell nobody about that. Candy was crestfallen. Didn't tell nobody but Crooks. George said, Well, you guys get out of here. Jesus, seems like I can't go away for a minute. Candy and Lenny stood up and went toward the door. Crooks called, Candy, huh? Remember what I said about hoeing and doing odd jobs? Yeah, said Candy. I remember. Just forget it, said Crooks. I didn't mean it. Just fooling. I wouldn't want to go to no place like that. Crooks is defeated, right, in a matter of moments, just because he's reminded of how he's been treated his whole life and this little dream he had, that, this little spark of a dream he had, has now been extinguished. Well, okay, if you feel like that, good night. The three men went out of the door. As they went through the barn, the horses snorted and the halter chains rattled. Crook sat on his bunk and looked at the door for a moment, and then he reached for the liniment bottle. He pulled out his shirt and back, poured a little liniment in his pink palm, and reaching around, he fell slowly to rubbing his back. So the chapter ends the same exact way it began, which is to symbolize something. Steinbeck is a genius. He's doing this to show us that despite dreams, despite being convinced, despite whatever wild ideas you have in your head, things normally just don't change, right? It's kind of depressing. But remember, this is a depressing time in this country. Not only was it segregated, but they were going through a financial crisis, the Great Depression, right? Nothing since has even approached that. And so Steinbeck is making the point of reminding the audience that, yeah, all these people, they have dreams, right? Go through the list. Lenny and George have a dream to get this land. Candy gets on board with their dream. Crooks then gets on board with that dream as well. Don't forget Curly's wife. Her dream was what? To be a performer, an actress. That dream was crushed. And right at the end of the chapter, Crooks' dream is crushed, right? He's doing exactly what he did at the beginning of the night. Nothing has changed, despite the fact that he actually did want it. Still can't have it, right? So that's not only symbolic, but you should think of that as foreshadowing. Yeah, this book is heavy and not always great. That's it for today. Next class, you guys will do a writing assignment about chapter 4. We're already 2/3 of the way through the book. It's awesome. Stay safe, stay home, stay classy. Bye, guys.